For a long time, the dynamic didn't survive because they were consistent, it survived because you were. That's the part people don't like to admit, because it makes you feel foolish. But it doesn't mean you were foolish, it means you were loving. You were the one who bridged the gaps. You were the one who softened the sharp edges. You were the one who reached when they retreated, who explained when they went silent, who tried to keep the connection warm even when their energy went cold. And to an avoidant, that becomes a kind of invisible safety net. Not a healthy one, but a powerful one. Avoidants often rely on distance as a coping mechanism. Distance calms them. Distance gives them control. Distance helps them avoid the discomfort of being emotionally responsible. When closeness triggers them, they don't lean in and talk it through. They step back. But here's what most people miss. Distance only feels safe when it doesn't cost them anything. Distance only works when they can retreat and still feel you attached. They can disappear for a day and still trust you'll respond. They can go cold and still trust you'll send warmth. They can act confused and still trust you'll chase clarity. That trust becomes their comfort. So when they pull away, part of them is not just seeking peace, part of them is also testing the environment. They are unconsciously asking, will you still be there? Will you still show up? Will you still want me even if I don't meet you? And every time you answer that test with effort, with patience, with reassurance, you reinforce a painful message. You teach their nervous system that withdrawal is safe because you will compensate for it. That's why they can stay in this pattern for so long. It's not because the relationship is stable. It's because the consequences are blocked. Your love cushions their avoidance. Your availability makes their inconsistency survivable. You become the soft place they can land without having to change. And you don't do it because you want to be a safety net. You do it because you think love means persistence. You think understanding will heal them. You think if you stay steady enough they'll finally relax and stop running. But there's a hidden cost. The more you carry, the less they have to. The more you chase, the less they must show up. The more you explain, the less they must communicate. Your strength becomes the reason the pattern can continue, and that's why it hurts so deeply, because it feels like you gave your best and still couldn't make them stay present. Then something shifts. Not because you become cold, not because you become manipulative, but because your nervous system gets tired. You realize you are doing emotional labor that isn't being matched. You realize you are constantly interpreting their silence, managing their moods, guessing where you stand. You realize you're shrinking your needs to keep the peace. And one day you stop. You stop sending the extra message. You stop filling the gap. You stop offering reassurance when they haven't offered respect. You stop chasing clarity from someone who keeps you in confusion. To you, this might feel like simple self-respect. To them, it feels like the floor moving, because now their usual coping strategy, distance, has become risky. The safety net is gone. The soft landing is gone. They can't retreat and still feel held. And that's the moment their system starts to scramble. This is what people mean when they say the avoidant crashes out. It's not always loud. It's rarely a clean confession. It's often internal, restless, unsettled, compulsive. They feel a strange pressure in their chest. They feel the urge to check your socials. They feel the impulse to send a casual message just to see if you're still there. They feel irritation they can't explain, jealousy that surprises them, anxiety they deny. Because your silence does something distance never did. It creates uncertainty for them. And uncertainty is what you've been living with the entire time. You've been living with the question, do I matter? Do they care? Are they coming back? Your silence finally hands that question to them. And when an avoidant can no longer rely on your attachment as background comfort, they are forced to face what they've been avoiding, the reality that you can detach, that you can stop chasing, that you can stop waiting, that you can choose yourself. This is why your silence is not absence, it's consequence. It's the consequence of a pattern where you are the only one keeping things emotionally alive. It's the consequence of their withdrawal no longer being rewarded, and consequence is what activates change or exposes the lack of it. So the distance they used as power starts to backfire. It no longer soothes them because it no longer guarantees you'll be there. It no longer gives them control because your quiet removes their certainty. They might not call it fear, they might call it curiosity, annoyance, or just checking in. But underneath is the same thing, the realization that the person who once made their avoidance comfortable is no longer available in the same way. And this is where you have to stay awake. Because the goal is not to get a reaction. The goal is to stay rooted. Your silence becomes powerful only when it's real, only when it comes from standards, not strategy. Because when you remove the safety net, the truth rises to the surface. Either they step forward with accountability and consistency, or they try to pull you back into the same cycle with crumbs. And your job is not to interpret their panic as love. Your job is to protect the version of you that finally stopped carrying a relationship alone. Your silence is not nothing, and the reason it hits an avoidant so hard is because it changes the meaning of everything that came before it. People think silence is passive, like you're just not speaking, not texting, not reacting. But with an avoidant, silence becomes active the moment it removes their certainty. It becomes a consequence, not because you're trying to punish them, but because you've stopped performing the role that made their distance comfortable. For an avoidant, control is safety. Not control in a villain way, but control in a nervous system way. Their body learned that closeness can become overwhelming, that emotions can become messy, that needs can become obligations. So they built a strategy that keeps them regulated, keep the connection close enough to feel something, but far enough to breathe. That's why they can do intimacy in bursts. That's why they can be warm and then vanish. That's why they can say they care but struggle to show up consistently. Their system is constantly scanning for the moment intimacy stops being optional and starts becoming responsibility. When you are still reaching, still checking in, still trying to talk, still explaining your feelings, the avoidance nervous system had a hidden comfort. You were still emotionally available. Even if they pulled away, they could feel your attachment humming in the background like a generator. That generator meant, I can step back and still be wanted. It meant, I can take space and still have access. It meant, I can regulate with distance without losing the connection. Your effort kept the door open. Your concern kept the thread alive. Your consistency became a quiet guarantee. So when you go silent, what they lose first is not you, it's the guarantee. And the human mind hates uncertainty, but the avoidant mind especially hates uncertainty when it can't control the outcome. Because their coping relies on knowing they can return when they want. Knowing they can re-enter without consequences. Knowing they can keep you there without having to fully choose you. That's why silence feels like a closed door. Not because you said, we're done, but because your behavior suddenly says, this dynamic doesn't work for me. That is consequence, and consequence triggers panic. The panic doesn't always look like crying or begging or heartfelt paragraphs. Avoidants rarely crash out in ways that reveal vulnerability, because vulnerability is what they've trained themselves to avoid. So the panic leaks out sideways. It becomes restlessness. It becomes checking your socials more than they admit. It becomes seeing if you've posted, if you're active, if you're okay, if you're with someone else. It becomes the impulse to send a casual message that requires no accountability. It becomes a sudden need to feel a pulse from you, even if it's a small one, because any response from you restores certainty. Even a cold response, even a short response, even a leave me alone. Anything is better than your silence, because silence is the one thing they can't regulate with. Silence makes them face the risk that you might be moving on, and moving on is the one outcome they can't control with distance. Now here's the deeper layer, and this is what most people miss. Your silence doesn't just create fear of losing you, it activates fear of being exposed. When you stop chasing, you stop cooperating with the story they tell themselves about you. The story might have been, they need me more, or they'll always be there, or they're not going anywhere. And when your silence appears, it challenges that story. It forces the avoidant to confront a truth they've been avoiding. You have limits, you have self-respect, you can detach, you can walk away. That realization can feel like an ego wound, but it's more than ego, it's a nervous system shock. Because their strategy depended on your predictability. They may never admit it, but your predictability was their safety. You were the stable base they could step away from and return to. You were the emotional home they didn't have to maintain. And when you go silent, they suddenly feel something they haven't felt in the dynamic, vulnerability. Vulnerability is the sensation of not knowing if you'll still be there. And that sensation is what you've been living with every time they pulled away. So the balance flips. They taste your experience. They feel the uncertainty you've been swallowing. They feel the insecurity that comes from lack of clarity. They feel the loss of control that comes from someone else choosing themselves. And because they don't know how to sit with vulnerability, they reach for control. They may try to re-enter lightly, to test your availability. They may act like nothing happened, because acting like nothing happened is a way to avoid accountability. They may provoke a reaction, because conflict still gives them a connection. They may try to pull you into conversation without addressing the distance, because the goal is not repair, the goal is regulation. This is where your silence becomes your power only if you don't break it for crumbs. Because if you respond too quickly to a low-effort reach out, you restore the old system. You put the safety net back. You teach them, distance still works because I'll still be here. And then you're back in the same loop, warmth, withdrawal, confusion, chasing, repeat. But if your silence is rooted in standards, something else happens. The avoidant has to decide whether they will approach you with truth or lose you with pride. They have to decide whether they will step into discomfort and communicate, or retreat and pretend they don't care. They have to decide whether they want access or intimacy, whether they want control or connection. And that's why silence is not absence. It is consequence. It is the moment your dignity becomes louder than your longing, and the moment their distance stops being their advantage and starts being their problem. Crashing out rarely looks like love, and that's why it confuses you, because you're waiting for the movie moment. You're waiting for the confession. You're waiting for the paragraph that finally admits what you meant. You're waiting for the apology that names the pattern, the moment they say, "I was scared, I pushed you away, I miss you." But avoidants are not wired to lead with vulnerability when they feel threatened. When your silence hits them, the emotion that rises is not calm clarity, it's a surge of discomfort, and their first instinct is to control that discomfort without exposing themselves. So instead of, "I miss you," you get side effects. Instead of accountability, you get signals. Instead of repair, you get testing. It's like watching someone try to hold water in their hands. They can't contain it, so it leaks through cracks you didn't even know were there. And if you don't understand what you're seeing, you'll either chase harder or romanticize the signs and think, this means they're changing. But crashing out is often just a nervous system scrambling for regulation, not a heart choosing growth. Here's what sideways crashing out can look like. Suddenly, they're watching. They're peeking into your world without entering it. They view your stories within minutes. They're online at odd hours. They accidentally like something and then remove it. They start showing up in subtle digital ways because it gives them a hit of connection without the risk of actual intimacy. It's safe contact. It's low vulnerability. It's control. Or they send the casual message, the "Hey stranger," the meme, the random question, the "How have you been?" Something light, something that allows them to gauge your availability without having to address why you went quiet in the first place. And if you respond warmly, they get exactly what they wanted, proof that the door is still open. If you respond coldly, they still get proof that you're still emotionally engaged. Either way, they've restored a sense of influence over the dynamic. That's why they often choose messages that are designed to get any reaction, because any reaction is regulation. Sometimes it shows up as irritation. They may act offended by your silence. They might say, "So you're just going to ignore me?" Or, "Wow, okay." Or, "I guess you're done." And it feels unfair because you've been swallowing their silence for so long. But this is the avoidant nervous system reacting to a loss of control. Your silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers their defenses. They try to regain footing by flipping the script, making you the one who is doing something wrong, because if they can make you the problem, they don't have to face their fear. Sometimes it shows up as sudden jealousy. Not always obvious, but you'll feel it. They ask questions they never asked before. They want to know who you're with. They act curious about your life in a way that doesn't match the distance they created. And you might think, they must love me. But jealousy is not love. Jealousy is often ownership being threatened. It's the uncomfortable realization that you are not on the shelf anymore, waiting to be picked up when they feel like it. Sometimes it shows up as a rebound energy. They post more, they seem louder, they appear happy, they might even date quickly, and it can hurt because it looks like you meant nothing. But often, that rush is distraction. It's them trying to regulate the discomfort your silence created by proving to themselves that they are fine, that they are desired, that they still have control. Avoidance can run toward anything that prevents them from sitting still with feeling. That doesn't mean they're healed. It means they're avoiding. And then there's the most confusing one, the soft return with no depth. They come back for connection, but not for intimacy. They want the comfort of you, not the challenge of you. They want your warmth, not your boundary. They want your presence, not your needs. So they hover, they circle. They send little pings. They keep you mentally engaged without fully showing up. And if you're emotionally hungry, you'll interpret hovering as progress. You'll tell yourself, at least they're thinking about me. At least they reached out. At least they care. But hovering is not building. Hovering is keeping access. This is why crashing out is dangerous for you if you don't have clarity. Because their sideways signals can pull you back into hope without giving you real safety. Your nervous system can start getting addicted again, waiting for the next ping, the next view, the next message. You start reading signs instead of reading behavior. You start living for breadcrumbs again. And the avoidant, without meaning to be cruel, learns that they can keep you engaged without changing. So here is the deeper truth. Sideways crashing out is the moment you can finally see the difference between desire and capacity. Desire is emotion. Capacity is behavior. Desire is missing you at midnight. Capacity is showing up at noon. Desire is wanting you when you pull away. Capacity is choosing you when you're close. Desire is saying, I've been thinking. Capacity is saying, I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to repair. I'm ready to be consistent. Your silence triggers them, but what they do with that trigger reveals everything. If their response is testing, hovering, provoking, and avoiding accountability, then your silence is not calling them into love, it's exposing their pattern. And if your response is to stay grounded, to not rush back, to not reward crumbs, you protect yourself from being pulled into another cycle. Because the goal is not to decode every sideways sign. The goal is to require a direct, mature step forward, not a hint, not a ping, not a story view, a real conversation, a real plan, a real change. And if they can't offer that, then the crash out is not romance, it's just their nervous system reacting to the consequences of losing access to you. Your silence doesn't just make them miss you, it removes the distraction that kept them from facing themselves. That's why it hits so hard. When you were still talking, still reaching, still asking, still trying to repair, the avoidant could stay focused on you, on your emotions, on your reactions, on the drama of the relationship. And I'm not calling you dramatic, I'm saying their nervous system experiences emotional conversation as intensity, so as long as you were engaging, they could keep the attention on the external world and avoid the internal one. They could say, this is too much, and make the problem your feelings instead of their fear. They could keep the story simple, I need space, and never look deeper than that. But your silence takes away the noise. It takes away the chasing, the explaining, the emotional energy that filled every gap. And now they're left with the one thing they've been running from, their own emotional reality. The empty space where your reassurance used to be becomes a mirror. The quiet becomes loud. And in that quiet they can't avoid the question anymore. What did I do? Why did I do it? And what does it cost me? This is where people misunderstand avoidance. They think avoidants are always calm. They think avoidants are always logical. But what you're really seeing is a person who has learned to disconnect quickly to protect themselves. That disconnection looks like calm, but it isn't peace, it's suppression. When you go silent with dignity, you stop offering the external regulation they were leaning on. You stop supplying the familiar pattern that allowed them to disconnect without consequence. And now the suppression starts to crack because the consequences are finally real. They start remembering. And that's dangerous for them because remembering pulls them toward feeling. They remember the warmth of your presence, not just the comfort, but the way you made them softer. They remember how easy it felt to laugh, how safe it felt to be held, how you saw them without trying to control them. They remember the moments they almost let their guard down. And those memories come with a sting, because those memories now carry loss. The mind tries to treat loss like a problem to solve, but loss is something you have to feel, and avoidants are not trained to feel without escaping. So they begin to wrestle with an internal conflict, and this is the part you don't get to see. One part of them wants to reach out. Another part of them is terrified of what reaching out means, because reaching out means admitting they care. Reaching out means admitting they were wrong. Reaching out means risking rejection. Reaching out means stepping into vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what they built their entire identity to avoid. They learned early that needing someone makes you weak. That closeness comes with a price. That emotional dependence leads to pain. So the moment your silence makes them feel that need, the moment they feel drawn toward you, their defenses activate. This is why they can feel pulled toward you and still behave confusingly. Because the pull is real, but so is the fear. They might think about texting you and then stop. They might write something and delete it. They might open your profile and close it. They might reach out indirectly, through a story view, through a casual message, through a, hey, that pretends nothing happened, because directness would expose the emotional truth. They're trying to get relief without vulnerability, and the silence also confronts them with identity, because many avoidants hold a self-image of being in control. They don't like feeling emotionally dependent. They don't like feeling affected. They don't like feeling like someone has power over them. When you go silent, it reveals that you do have power, not power over them in a manipulative way, but power to leave, power to stop engaging, power to choose yourself. And that shakes them. It challenges the version of the story where they are the one who decides when closeness happens and when it ends. Your silence says, you are not the only one with choice. That is why they can react with irritation, defensiveness, even arrogance at first. Because defensiveness is the ego trying to regain control. If they can make you feel guilty for being quiet, then you'll re-engage. If they can provoke you into explaining yourself, then they've restored the old dynamic where your energy keeps things alive. If they can turn your boundary into a fight, then they don't have to sit with the quiet consequence of what they did. Conflict becomes a substitute for intimacy, because conflict still keeps you connected. But the longer you remain grounded, the more the mirror intensifies. The more the silence forces them to look inward. And the inward look brings up uncomfortable truths, that they did pull away, that they did keep things vague, that they did take your love for granted, that they did assume you would always be there. Not because they're evil, but because the dynamic trained them that you would compensate. Now they have to face the cost of their coping. This is where the silence becomes the most powerful teacher in the whole story. It teaches them that your love is not infinite when your needs are ignored. It teaches them that access to you requires care. It teaches them that you are not a safe place to visit only when they feel like it. It teaches them that your presence is not guaranteed, and it teaches you something too. It teaches you that your peace matters more than proving your value. It teaches you that you don't have to scream to be heard, because your silence is saying what your heart was trying to say for a long time. I won't keep holding a connection that keeps dropping me. The trap most people fall into is simple, but it's powerful. When you've been starving for clarity, even crumbs feel like a feast. And when an avoidant starts crashing out, the first thing they usually do is not come back with maturity. They come back with a signal, a small reach, a tiny ping, a casual message that pretends nothing happened. And because your nervous system has been living in uncertainty, your heart hears that ping like oxygen. You think, finally there it is, proof I mattered, proof they care, proof they're coming back. But what you're often receiving in that moment is not love. It's a pressure release valve. Avoidants are experts at regulating without repairing. They don't always mean to be, it's just how their system works. When discomfort rises, they reach for whatever reduces it fastest. Sometimes that reduction comes from distance. Sometimes it comes from distraction. And when you go silent and remove the safety net, the discomfort spikes, so they reach for the quickest way to lower it: contact, but not intimacy; connection, but not accountability; access, but not responsibility. This is why the first reach out is often casual. It's designed to test the door, not rebuild the house. A hey, a meme, how are you? A random question about something they could easily figure out themselves. It looks innocent. It looks warm. It looks like a return. But it is often a probe. They are checking your availability. They are checking if your silence is real. They are checking if they can still pull you back into the old dynamic without facing the uncomfortable truth of what happened. Because the truth would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is exactly what they avoid. This is where people sabotage themselves, because they respond to the probe as if it's a promise. They answer quickly. They overgive. They pour warmth. They explain what they've been feeling. They try to restart the connection with the same hope that kept them chasing before. And the avoidant feels the relief immediately. The door is still open. The control is back. The uncertainty is gone. Their nervous system settles. And once it settles, the urgency that made them reach out in the first place often disappears. So they drift again. They go quiet again. They become inconsistent again. And you're left thinking, what happened? I thought they came back. What happened is that you rewarded contact instead of requiring repair. You treated attention like effort. You treated a reach out like a change. And this is not your fault, it's your conditioning. When you've been neglected emotionally, any sign of contact feels like hope. Your brain starts bargaining. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe they've realized. Maybe they've changed. But the end game doesn't care about maybe. The end game cares about behavior. Because there's a difference between missing you and being ready for you. Missing you is emotional. Readiness is structural. Missing you is chemistry and longing. Readiness is communication, consistency, and accountability. Missing you can happen in loneliness. Readiness shows up in daylight, in routine, over time, when it's not dramatic. The trap is that avoidants often return with emotion but without structure. They might say, I've been thinking about you. They might say, I miss you. They might even say, I'm sorry. But if that apology isn't followed by a conversation about the pattern and a commitment to do something different, it becomes another loop. Because emotion without structure is just a moment. And you don't need moments, you need safety. Another version of the trap is when they reach out and you feel tempted to make it easy for them. You don't want to scare them away, so you ignore the past. You keep it light. You pretend you weren't hurt. You accept the casual vibe because you're afraid that asking for accountability will make them disappear again. So you swallow your needs to keep them close. And in doing that, you teach them the most dangerous lesson of all, that intimacy with you requires nothing from them. And that lesson will cost you your self-respect, because you will start living in a relationship where you're grateful for basic decency, grateful for replies, grateful for the bare minimum, and you'll start calling that love because you want it so badly. But love is not supposed to make you shrink. So what do you do when the probe arrives? When the casual message comes? When the meme pops up? When the hey shows up in your notifications? You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to be cold. But you do have to be anchored. You have to decide what you respond to. You respond to maturity, not to panic. You respond to repair, not to pings. You respond to consistency, not to nostalgia. That means you can reply calmly, but you don't rush back into emotional availability. You don't reward a low-effort reach with high-effort access. You don't immediately become the comforting, safe place that makes their avoidance sustainable again. You let the message be what it is, and you watch what they do next. Do they follow up? Do they address what happened? Do they take responsibility? Do they make a plan? Do they show up consistently after the initial reach? Because if they only reach out to reduce their discomfort, they will disappear once they feel better. And if you keep responding to that, you will become the medicine they take, not the love they choose. The trap is not the reach out. The trap is the meaning you attach to it. The trap is thinking, they came back so it must be different. The truth is, a return is not proof. A return is only a door opening. Proof is what they build after they walk through it. The endgame test is where you stop confusing reaction with devotion, and you start measuring the only thing that matters, capacity. Because when an avoidant is crashing out, over your silence, you will be tempted to treat that intensity as proof that you mattered. And yes, it can prove you mattered, but mattering is not the same as being chosen well. Mattering is not the same as being loved responsibly. Mattering is not the same as being met with consistency. People can feel you deeply and still fail you consistently. People can miss you and still be unsafe for you. People can crave you and still avoid the very intimacy that would protect the relationship. So the endgame test is not whether they come back, it's how they come back, and what happens after they do. Many avoidants return when they feel the loss of control, not when they've developed emotional skill. Your silence removes the certainty that they can step away and still have access. That can trigger urgency. They can suddenly want you again. They can suddenly realize. They can suddenly show emotion. But urgency is not maturity. Urgency is often anxiety. It's the nervous system reacting to perceived loss. And if you mistake anxiety for readiness, you will reopen the door to the same cycle with a different outfit on. This is why you need a test that is calm, direct, and non-negotiable. The test is not an interrogation. It's not, prove you love me. It's not a fight. It's simply you requiring a standard before you reinvest. You are not punishing them. You are protecting yourself. You are not asking for perfection. You are asking for reality. Because in avoidant dynamics, the most common trap is the soft return. They come back lightly, casually, without naming what happened. A meme, a how are you, a compliment, a random question. The goal of that message is simple, to see if the door is still open without stepping into accountability. And if you respond with full warmth, full access, full emotional availability, you just taught them a dangerous lesson. They can disappear, return, and reset the relationship without repairing anything. That lesson is the seed of every repeated cycle. So the endgame test begins the moment they re-enter. Do they address the gap, or do they pretend it didn't happen? Do they own their withdrawal, or do they act like you're dramatic for noticing? Do they communicate like an adult, or do they hover like a teenager? Do they bring clarity, or do they bring confusion with a smile? Do they bring repair, or do they bring nostalgia? Because nostalgia is seductive. Nostalgia makes you remember the good moments and forget the pattern. Nostalgia makes you soften. Nostalgia makes you think, maybe this time will be different. But the test is not about how good it felt before. The test is about what they are willing to do now. Real change has a signature. It looks like accountability without defensiveness. It sounds like, I realize I pulled away and I can see how that affected you. Not, I needed space and you should understand. It looks like intention, not vagueness. It sounds like, I want to build this with you and I'm ready to talk about what consistency looks like. Not, let's just see. It looks like willingness to be uncomfortable. It sounds like, I get triggered by closeness and I'm working on it. Not, this is just how I am. It looks like repair, not re-entry. Repair means they want to discuss the rupture, not just bypass it. And most importantly, real change shows up over time. Not in a single emotional message. Not in one good week. Not in a burst of attention that fades the moment you relax. Anyone can act present when they're afraid of losing you. The test is whether they can remain present when they have you. The test is whether they can stay consistent when the urgency disappears. Because that's the true environment of a relationship, not the panic of almost losing it, but the daily choice to care even when it's not dramatic. This is where you must shift your focus. Stop asking, are they thinking about me? Start asking, are they showing up for me? Stop asking, do they miss me? Start asking, do they meet me? Stop asking, was I special? Start asking, is this safe? Because safety is the end game. Safety is not boredom, safety is peace. Safety is being able to have a need without being punished for it. Safety is being able to speak without fear of abandonment. Safety is not walking on eggshells. Safety is not decoding tone. Safety is not waiting for the next pullback. So your response must come from grounded self-respect. You don't need to be cold. You don't need to be cruel. You simply don't give full access without proof of capacity. You can reply calmly, but you don't rush into emotional intimacy until the dynamic is addressed. You can be kind, but you don't reopen the whole door because they knocked softly. Keenness without standards is how people lose years in cycles. And here is the deeper truth. The end game test is not designed to get an avoidant to pass. It's designed to keep you from failing yourself, because you deserve a love that doesn't require you to disappear inside your own relationship. You deserve a love where your silence isn't the only thing that gets their attention. You deserve a love where your needs don't threaten them. And if they cannot offer that, your silence becomes the closing chapter that saves you, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally started choosing yourself.